On the last night, he wore a crown. The vampire king sat alone in a hall of sleeping torches and wondered why his hands felt so heavy. The castle around him was old stone and older shadows. Its towers rose above a forest that had forgotten summer. Its roots sunk deep into soil that had known too much blood. For centuries, the king had ruled his kind with a still gaze and a steady hand. His council said he was wise because he was fair, and feared because he was unwavering. His people said he was strong because he had turned his heart to iron and never looked back. He had another name, long buried, from a time when his hands were not cold and his eyes were not red. That name had been spoken by a woman who laughed in sunlight and a boy who ran through fields and called him brother. But such names fade when one drinks night instead of daylight, and the vampire king had let his old name fall away like the last leaf of an autumn that would not return. Tonight, though, a small seed of unease stirred in him, as if some distant echo of that forgotten name were walking slowly toward his heart. The long hall was quiet. Banners hung motionless. The torches along each wall glowed with a dull, patient flame. Below the great windows, the forest waited in its usual hush. Yet the king could not rest his mind. A messenger had come at dusk with bowed head and careful words. "We have captured the one who has roused the border villages against us," the messenger had said. "The executions, as your majesty ordered, are set for midnight. The leader will kneel first, as example." The king had nodded. It was the proper answer. A ruler of night could not allow rebellion to spread among humans and vampires alike. A firm hand now would spare countless others later. This was the way of the night court, measured, unsentimental, precise. And yet, as he sat on the cold throne, the weight in his chest grew. He rose and crossed the silent hall. The crown on his brow was a slender circlet of black metal, carving an unbroken line around his head. It was not heavy, not in truth, but tonight it pressed upon him as if the entire hall were balanced upon that single ring, and he the only stone preventing its fall. He left the hall and descended the winding stair that led below the earth. The deeper he went, the cooler the air became, smelling faintly of damp stone and old iron. Torches burned here too, though more sparsely. Their light trembled along the tunnel, catching on the edges of metal bars and the worn curves of stone. He had come here many times, past these cells, looked upon those who would not leave them alive. When he visited, his steps were usually silent, his mind clear. Mercy in his realm did not look like release. It looked like quick endings instead of slow ones. He had believed this with the calm certainty of one who has lived long enough to see the harm that foolish kindness can do when it's not paired with wisdom. Tonight, however, as he neared the last cell, he heard something unexpected. A soft humming, more like memory than voice. He slowed. The humming ceased at once, as if the air itself had held its breath. "Open it," the king said quietly to the guard, who straightened at once and turned the key. The bars slid aside with a low, grating sound that blended with the lingering silence. Inside the cell, a single prisoner knelt with his hands bound. His clothes were torn, stained with mud and the marks of rough capture, but his back was straight. His hair fell in dark, uneven layers about his face. When he lifted his head, the torchlight caught his features. The vampire king stopped. The prisoner's eyes were brown, but not the dull brown of soil long trodden underfoot. They were the color of fresh earth first turned in spring, deep and alive. A thin scar marked his right cheek, running toward a mouth that was set, but not cruel. He looked older than the boy the king dimly remembered, yet something in the angle of his jaw, the shape of his hands, the way his shoulders held quiet stubbornness. A name rose in the king's mind, sudden and painful, like a stone breaking the still surface of a pond. "Aaron," he whispered. The prisoner blinked slowly, as if he too were staring through time. "That is a name I have not heard in years," the man said. "Only one person ever called me that without laughter or scorn." He spoke the old name again, the one the vampire king had not allowed in his halls, not even in whispers. It slid through the air of the cell like a forgotten song. Byron. The king closed his eyes. For a single moment, he was no ruler of the night, no immortal monarch of shadow. He was a young man again, standing at the edge of a wheat field at dusk, the earth warm beneath his bare feet and his little brother tugging his hand, asking if the stories of stars were true. When he opened his eyes, the cell did not vanish, nor did the shackles around the man's wrists. The hall of stone remained, and the knowledge of his own nature settled around him again like a familiar cloak. "You should not speak that name," the king said, though his voice lacked its usual hard edge. "That man has long been dead." Aaron, his brother, though the word felt fragile in this cold place, held his gaze. "Then it is a strange thing," he replied softly, "that I see him standing before me." Silence hovered between them, filled with years unspoken. The guard at the door shifted his weight, uncertain, eyes carefully averted. The torches murmured quietly along the walls, their flames bending now and then as if some invisible wind passed through. "You are the leader of those who resist us," the king said at last. "You incited the villagers, you attacked our patrols." Aaron did not deny it. "I did," he said. "I have seen what fear does when it festers. Humans hiding in their homes at dusk, children taught to whisper your name like a curse. I have seen vampires, hungry and ashamed, forced into cruelty by old vows they no longer believe in. I tried to build something different. Your guards saw it as rebellion." The vampire king listened. He knew his council would call these words manipulation, crafted to weaken a ruler's resolve. Yet there was no venom in Aaron's voice, only weariness and a steady kind of longing. "You have become what they say, then," Aaron added gently. "Lord of darkness, judge of all, my brother who went into the forest one night and never returned." The king felt, dimly, the way memory and regret tangled together, like roots beneath the castle foundations. The night he had vanished from his family's life, there had been no grand bargain, no glorious battle. He had simply wandered too far into the woods, drawn by a sound like distant bells. He had been offered strength, eternity, and the end of fear. He had taken it, thinking it a gift that would let him protect those he loved. He had been too naive to understand that eternity can pull one away from the brief, bright lives it touches, until the weakness it meant to shield one from is the only thing left that feels real. "Yes," he said quietly, "I became what they say." "And now," Aaron's head tilted a fraction, "what will you become tonight?" The question was not a taunt. It was simple, almost like the questions he had once asked as a boy. The king turned away from the cell door and paced a few steps, his cloak stirring faintly behind him. Expectations circled in his mind. The council's stern faces, the murmur of the gathered court, the unspoken yet absolute rule that a king must not be seen to falter. If he refused the execution, it would be read as weakness. The border villages might rise again. His own kind might question his judgment. Worse, they might turn on him. Yet, as he considered all this, the unease in his chest did not lessen. Instead, it clarified into something simple and clear, like ice forming on still water. He had been afraid of weakness for so long that he had forgotten there are different kinds of strength. "One life will not end the hatred," he said slowly, still facing the corridor. "But it may stop a new kind of beginning. If I spare you, they will call you symbol, martyr, hero of defiance. They will gather around your name." "They already do," Aaron answered with the trace of a sad smile. "But that is not the question. You are not here in this cold place to weigh my usefulness against my death. You did not come because I am a leader. You came because you recognized my face." He was right. The vampire king did not like the truth of it. He prided himself on clarity, on decisions unclouded by sentiment. Yet here he stood, heart moved not by policy or threat, but by the simple, unavoidable fact of family. Of a boy he had once sworn in another life to keep safe. "What would you have me do?" the king asked, more to himself than to Aaron. Aaron's answer was quiet. "I would have you remember the man you were, not to live in the past, but to see if that man still has anything to say to the king you have become." The king turned back to the cell, his fingers grazing absent-mindedly over the cold metal of his crown. He thought of the council he would face in an hour. He imagined their shocked expressions if he declared, before the assembled court, that the prisoner would be spared. He saw the chain of reactions unspooling, murmurs, outrage, whispered plans in dark corners. They might remove him. They might do worse. There were many things the vampire king could survive. Staking, burning, exile into light. Such tales were dramatized and simplified, but he knew the real dangers. He knew, too, that his people, ancient and cunning, would not destroy a leader lightly. Yet dethronement would be its own kind of ending. He found, as he weighed it, that the thought did not fill him with dread, only with a quiet, steady sorrow and something else, a lightness he could not yet name. "Aaron," he said, tasting the name, letting it sit fully in his mouth for the first time in centuries. "If I spare you and they strip me of this crown, what will you do?" "I will live," Aaron replied simply. "I will go on doing what I can to protect the helpless, human and vampire alike. I do not hate your kind. I hate only what fear and hunger make of us all." "And if I do not?" The king's voice was very soft. "If I do as they expect?" Aaron did not look away. "Then I will die, and still others will rise. You cannot kill the longing for safety, for dignity, for simple peace. It has always been stronger than any throne." The king stood very still. He remembered his first century of rule, when he had watched villages from afar, unseen from the tree line. He had watched mothers pulling children inside at twilight, candles lit in windows like small defiant stars. He had told himself that his strength kept other, wilder predators at bay, that his hard decrees prevented worse chaos. It was not entirely untrue, but somewhere along the way, he had stopped looking closely enough to see the faces behind the fear. He had counted numbers. He had measured stability. And he had forgotten that without compassion, order becomes another word for chains. At last he spoke. "I cannot free you tonight," he said. "If I slip you out like a shadow, they will hunt you all the harder and accuse me besides of cowardly deception. You will be target and pretext both." Aaron frowned, confusion touching his features. "Then what are you saying?" The vampire king stepped closer to the bars. For the first time since entering the cell block, he let the weariness in his shoulders show. "I am saying," he replied, "that if mercy has a price, I will pay it in the open, not in the dark. I will not pretend this choice is easy. But if I do nothing, I become smaller than the boy whose brother trusted him." He looked at Aaron for a long moment. "I will refuse to kill you," he said. "Not in secret, not quietly, before the council, before our people. I will say that your life is not mine to take." Aaron's eyes widened slightly. Not in hope, exactly, but in a dawning recognition of the risk. "They will not accept that," he murmured. "No," the king agreed. "They will not." "Then you will lose everything." The vampire king lifted a hand to his crown and with a slow, almost reverent motion, removed it. For a heartbeat, the world did not change. The torches still burned. The stone still held its long cold. But within him, something eased. "I will lose this," he said, looking at the circlet in his pale hand. "But everything, no, there is more to me than this metal I had forgotten." He closed his fingers around the crown and then opened them again, as if releasing some unseen burden. "Prepare yourself," he told Aaron. "When they lead you to the hall, walk with your head high. There are many eyes who have forgotten how to look at a human without seeing only prey or threat. Let them see a man instead." Aaron exhaled slowly. "And you?" he asked. "What will they see in you?" "I do not know," the king admitted. "Perhaps at last they will see the truth." He turned and climbed the long stair back toward the great hall. The council had gathered when he arrived. They stood below the throne dais in a half circle, robes glimmering faintly in the torchlight. Their faces were varied, some old and thoughtful, others youthful and sharp, but on all of them there rested the same expectant severity. Around the hall, his subjects waited, pale faces turned toward the center, eyes reflecting the dim flames. A hush fell as he appeared. He walked slowly, the crown in his hand instead of on his brow, and that small difference rippled through the room like the first wind before a storm. He did not sit upon the throne. Instead, he stopped at the base of its steps and turned to face them. "Tonight," he said, his voice steady, carrying without force, "you expect a death." A murmur stirred, quickly silenced by a raised hand from an elder counselor. "You expect it," the king continued, "because for years we have told ourselves that fear must be fed to remain obedient. We have believed that mercy is a luxury we cannot afford. I have believed it. I have ordered endings in its name." He paused, letting the memories rise in him, not turning away from them. "The prisoner below," he said, "is a leader among humans. He has spoken against us. He has raised their courage where we wish them silent. You say we must kill him to preserve our rule." He lifted the crown so all could see it. "I say no." The word hung in the air with unexpected weight. It was not shouted, not thrust like a weapon. It simply existed, clear and unshakable. "No," he repeated. "I will not kill him, not because I have forgotten the dangers, not because I am suddenly blind to the risks of rebellion, but because I remember, at last, that our power is not rooted in fear alone. If it is, then we have built our eternity on rotten foundations." One of the counselors stepped forward, eyes narrow with alarm. "Your Majesty," she began carefully, "this is not the time for—" "This is precisely the time," he interrupted, gentle but firm. "There is no quiet moment for transformation. We only ever have the one we stand in." He let his gaze travel across the gathered faces, vampire and a few invited human envoys alike. "We are strong," he said, "yet we hide from the sun. We are wise, yet we cling to old laws as if they were chains instead of tools to be reshaped. We speak of honor, yet we allow fear to rule us as surely as it rules those we prey upon." He lowered the crown. "I will not kill this man. I will not pretend his life is a threat so great that it requires blood to balance the scales of our existence. If our rule cannot endure one spared life, then it is too frail to deserve the knights it claims." A restless sound moved through the crowd. The council exchanged glances. One of the eldest, whose skin bore the faintest lines of great age, spoke in a voice that trembled only slightly. "You would risk war with the humans." "I would risk honesty," the former king replied. "If they see us as monsters, let it be because we are unwilling to change, not because we have never tried." The elder regarded him for a long, searching moment. Then he bowed his head, not in deference, but in a kind of tired resignation. "You refuse the execution," he said. "You know the consequence." "I do," the vampire king said quietly. "I accept it." The elder turned to the others. There was no dramatic outcry, no sudden rush of guards. Instead, the counselors withdrew a few steps, forming their own small circle. They spoke in low tones, the murmur barely reaching the nearest onlookers. It was a simple thing, almost ordinary, like villagers deciding when to plant their crops. At last, they turned back. "As council," the elder announced, voice carrying through the hall, "we declare that you have stepped away from the duties of the throne. By tradition older than all of us, a king who refuses to enact judgment when it is deemed necessary by the circle is no longer king. You are relieved of your crown and your authority. You will leave this hall as a private soul. You may not command, nor claim the protections of your former station." A low ripple of astonishment moved through the court, but no one protested on his behalf. They had followed him for centuries. They had forgotten there could be any other arrangement. He nodded. "Very well," he said. And then, to their quiet surprise, he smiled. It was a small, worn smile, but it held something they had never seen in him before. Peace, wrapped in sorrow, lit with a thin thread of hope. He walked to the elder, and, in full view of everyone, placed the crown into his hands. "It is only metal," he murmured. "Do not let it own you." The elder accepted it with a grave expression, though a flicker of unease passed through his eyes. "Then go," he said, "before we change our minds." The former king inclined his head. He turned and left the hall, his footsteps unhurried, the weight from his brow gone. As he passed through the great doors, two younger vampires watched him with something like awakening on their faces. He did not return to the dungeons by the main stair. Those paths no longer belonged to him. Instead, he took a narrow, half-forgotten corridor that twisted downward along the outer wall, until he reached a small door that opened behind the prison block. The guard at Aaron's cell stared in astonishment as he appeared. You should not be here, Madge." "Not Majesty," the former king said mildly. "Not anymore. I have no title that binds you, only a request." He pressed a small token into the guard's hand, an old signet from before his rule, simple and unadorned, carrying no power the council recognized now. "Walk away," he said. "Just for a little while. Whatever happens, you saw nothing. You opened nothing. You heard nothing." The guard hesitated, glancing at Aaron, then back at the man who had once ruled him. Perhaps he saw in that calm, pale face not command, but something even rarer, an invitation to be more than a tool. After a long moment, the guard closed his fingers around the token and stepped aside. "I was never here," he murmured. His footsteps faded up the corridor. The former king opened the cell. "You're free," he told Aaron. Aaron rose slowly, his shackled hands lowering to his sides. "They let you do this?" he asked, disbelief warring with caution. "No," came the quiet answer. "They took my crown. In return, I took back my choice." He moved to Aaron's wrists and examined the iron cuffs. With a controlled effort, he bent the metal just enough for them to slip loose. They fell to the stone with a soft clink that seemed, in that moment, louder than any fanfare. Aaron rubbed his wrists, looking at him with a gaze that was suddenly very young, very old, and very open. "Why?" Aaron asked. "You could have kept your power. My death would have been one more among many. Why risk it?" The former king searched for an answer that was neither grand nor small. "Because," he said slowly, "for a long time I have been someone I did not entirely recognize. Tonight I saw a mirror I could not turn away from. It had your face, and behind it my own." He took a breath he did not need, and yet it grounded him. "I wanted to know who I might be without fear guarding every choice I make." Aaron regarded him for a moment, then gave a short, shaking laugh that held no mockery, only a sort of quiet awe. "You are my brother," he said. "I thought I had lost him forever. I did lose him, but some part of him found its way back." The former king swallowed against a tightness in his throat. "We do not have much time," he said softly. "Go into the forest. There is an old path that leads north, toward the human settlements that still stand free of my old reach. Yours now, I suppose." "Ours," Aaron corrected gently. The word lingered between them, tentative but real. "What will you do?" Aaron asked. "Without your throne, your court, your anything." The man who had been king considered the question. The future stretched before him not as a carved road, but as an open field, mist lying low over grass he had never walked. "I will learn," he said, "what it means to live among those I once ruled. Perhaps I will guard the borders of your villages from the dark I once commanded. Perhaps I will build something new, not a throne, but a shelter, perhaps, a place where both kinds can come without fear." Aaron stepped closer. "Come with me," he urged. "We can start it together, a different kind of kingdom." The former king almost said yes at once. The image rose easily. A small settlement lit by lanterns instead of torches, children laughing under a dusk that held no terror, vampires and humans sharing stories instead of threats. It seemed so simple. But he knew the world was not only made of simple things. "I cannot walk into your villages by your side," he said gently. "Not yet. To them, I am a legend of terror. To show up at their gates arm in arm with their leader would be to bring the very fear we wish to unmake." Aaron's jaw tightened, but he did not argue. "Then what?" he asked. The former king offered a small, sad smile. "I will walk the edges instead," he said. "Guard the paths as a quiet watchman. Help those who are lost in the dark. Turn aside those of my own kind who would harm without thought. I will be a story they hear only in hints. That sometimes, when the night seems about to swallow them, a stranger steps from the shadows and leads them home." Aaron's eyes shone, though no tears fell. "You would do that," he whispered. "I did not protect you when I should have," came the answer. "I cannot go back, but there are other brothers, other sisters. Their names I do not know yet. I would learn them, perhaps, from a distance at first, but still." He hesitated, then added, with a flicker of something like shy hope. "And perhaps one day, when enough nights have passed, when fear has softened its hold, you might invite me in the front way. As a guest, not a king, not a monster, just your brother." Aaron's mouth trembled, then steadied. "I will build such a place," he said, "with doors that open easily and windows that do not need bars. And when it is ready, I will leave a lantern on the north road. You will know it is for you." They stood there in the dim light of the prison corridor, facing each other as men separated by years and choices and unspoken love. No grand gestures passed between them, only a slight inclination of heads, mirrored on both sides, like a bow and an embrace combined. "Go," the former king said quietly, "before the council sends someone down to make certain their sentence was carried out." Aaron nodded. He stepped past his brother, through the open cell door, and moved down the corridor without chains, without escort. His footsteps were lighter now, though the weight of what lay before him was not small. At the far end, he paused and looked back. "You have not lost your throne," he said softly. "You have traded it." "For what?" his brother asked. Aaron's answer was simple. "For a different kind of kingdom, one that begins not with walls but with a single choice." Then he was gone, swallowed not by darkness, but by the possibility of night as something gentler than it had been. The man who had been king remained in the corridor a little longer. He listened to the quiet. He felt the castle around him, the stone he had believed would be his eternal anchor. It no longer held him, nor did it cast him out. It simply existed as it always had. He turned and walked away from the dungeon, away from the great hall, away from the chambers that had been his for longer than human memory. No one stopped him. A few watched his passage with puzzled eyes, but there was no hatred in their gaze, only uncertainty. And in some, a faint reflection of the question that now guided his steps. What else might we be? He left the castle by a side gate, stepping into the forest that had first claimed him all those years ago. The trees stood tall and silent, branches woven into a canopy that kept the sky at bay. Once, this had been the threshold of his unending night. Tonight, it felt like the border of something new. He moved through the brush with silent ease, following no mapped path, only the tug of some quiet knowing in his chest. He would not follow Aaron directly. That would draw hunters. Instead, he angled east, then north, tracing a loose, invisible shield around where he guessed the villages might be. Already, in his mind, he was reshaping the stories that would be told. Not of a ruthless king who ruled by fear, nor of a vengeful monster punished for a moment's softness. but of a night when a creature of shadow chose not to kill, and in losing his throne, found his purpose. In time, the humans would tell the tale beside winter fires, their children leaning close to catch every word. They would speak of the vampire king who laid down his crown rather than break the last thread binding him to his own heart. They would say he became a wanderer, a secret guardian of roads and borders, a quiet hand in the dark. The vampires, too, would whisper. Some would scorn him as foolish, others would praise his courage. A few, perhaps, would vanish from the old court and appear, years later, at the edges of human lands, choosing a gentler silence over ancient cruelties. As for the man himself, walking now among trees that no longer felt like walls, he did not think of legends. He thought of a boy's laughter in fields of wheat, of a name he had reclaimed, of a lantern that might one day burn on a northern road. He could not undo the centuries behind him, nor erase the fear his existence had carved into so many hearts. But he could shape the nights ahead, one small act at a time. And though the crown no longer circled his brow, something else settled around his shoulders, a mantle woven of humility, quiet resolve, and a love that had survived even his own forgetting. It was lighter than metal, but stronger than iron. Beneath the shelter of ancient branches, the fallen king lifted his face to the hidden stars and began, at last, to walk toward a kingdom with no throne and no walls, built instead from every life he chose to protect. The night did not grow brighter. The forest did not suddenly bloom. Yet, in the hush between one breath and the next, something shifted, as gently as a heart deciding to open. In that soft, unremarkable moment, a new legend took its first real step into the world.